everyone. Welcome to Mote Marine Laboratory. I'm Stephanie Kettle, the PR manager for Mote. Thank you so much for coming out today. We're going to have a couple of speakers from Mote, some of our state agencies, and following that we'll have a quick Q&A and then some little scientific demonstrations with some of the awesome technology here at Mote. So with that, I will start it with Dr. Michael P. Crosby, President and CEO of Mote Marine Laboratory.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. As those of you in the room that live in South Florida are very aware, we're dealing with some environmental emergencies here in Southwest Florida. Mote Marine Laboratory is proud to have been serving as a leader on the front lines of responding to these harmful algal blooms with science, with technology, with passion, and with partnerships with many of the organizations that you're going to hear from in a minute. Mote is only able to really serve in this leadership role because of the decades that we have been conducting research here, 63 years in Southwest Florida, with the support, incredible support from our community. You all know very well that there are two different types of harmful algal blooms that we're experiencing. Very different in terms of their origins, very different in terms of their impacts. But both of them are very devastating, not only to the ecology of Southwest Florida and to our quality of life here in Southwest Florida, but also due to the rather significant impacts to our economy as well. Now, scientists from Mote are working tirelessly with many of our partners, including FWC, DEP, the Department of Health, and several other organizations to respond to these harmful algal bloom events. And we applaud the governor for providing support for rapid responses to the red tide event, including funding for assessing impacts to our fisheries, launching a major stock enhancement program, ramping up capabilities for sea turtle and marine mammal stranding operations, determining airborne toxin impacts to humans, increasing water quality monitoring, and testing innovative technologies for mitigating the impacts of red tide. Mote Marine Laboratories also laid out a vision in partnership with many of these organizations that are here with us today for the need to do even much more than we've already done. We're building on decades of incredibly productive research partnerships with our colleagues at FWC and many different universities and organizations, nonprofit organizations around the region. We're building on that incredible productivity of research to now be able to launch an additional initiative that is going to focus on applied science and technology that is going to help us, in fact, attack red tide and decrease the impacts that these harmful algal blooms have on our ecosystems, our quality of life, and our economy. And we're very, very pleased that the governor has endorsed this concept. And I look forward to working with all of our colleagues here with me today and many others from throughout the state of Florida and, in fact, from all around the world to actually develop new technologies to mitigate the impacts of red tide. So we look forward to continuing and expanding these collaborations with not only our scientific partners, but also our local communities and the volunteer citizen scientists that help us here at Mote so that we can develop increasingly impactful, independent, and objective red tide research and mitigation breakthroughs. And with that, I'd like to introduce one of our great partners here, the Executive Director for FWCC, Eric Sutton.
Thank you, Dr. Crosby. Thank you, Dr. Crosby, and thanks everyone for being here. My name is Eric Sutton. I'm the Executive Director for Florida Fish and Wildlife. And while we are based in Tallahassee, and that's where I live, I learned how to fish just a little bit south of here out of Big Pass with my grandpa. And I can remember how disappointed I was as a young boy when he told me we couldn't fish because red tide was in the area. So it's a bit strange to be here today and addressing you all with that same sort of disappointment that I know the community is feeling. So what I wanted to make sure and mention is that with the support of our commissioner and our governor, we've taken a number of response and recovery actions beginning with executive orders that allowed, of course, for the cleanup of any fish regardless of bag limits. We also instituted catch and release only for snook and redfish from Anna Maria Island south. That will be a topic of conversation whether to continue that with our commission meeting next week. But what's exciting today is to discuss the $2.2 million that the governor has made available for us to test in the field some innovative research technologies that Dr. Crosby was alluding to. This is with a partnership of worldwide experts on harmful algal blooms, which red tide is a piece of that. What the community should be proud of is that we have all of the world experts on red tide at Mote Marine and FWC right here between Sarasota and St. Pete. You will find no others more knowledgeable. The bad news is they're here because we have these blooms, and we have for literally hundreds of years. But with their support and them driving, and with the governor's support of $2.2 million on this research, we're looking forward to exploring the feasibility of how and when can we mitigate these impacts that we are certainly feeling this today. And this is in addition to all the other things Dr. Crosby was mentioning, including enhancing our fisheries. So I'm pleased to announce that, and we will have that information available to you before you leave. And at this time, I'd like to turn it back to Dr. Crosby.
Thanks very much, Director. And we've had a little bit of a roundtable discussion earlier today with a number of our Mote scientists from the state agencies, some of our local businessmen and women, folks from various different stakeholder communities here in Southwest Florida to talk about this incredible challenge that we're all facing together here, about how we are moving forward both in a tactical manner and a more strategic manner to address the impacts of this red tide event now, but also setting the stage and a strong foundation for developing those technologies so that we won't see these kinds of events again. At least we'll be able to mitigate the impacts of these events in the future. And we were very fortunate to have several of our elected officials from the area with us as well. And I wonder if I could just ask Representative Gruters if he would like to make a couple of comments on this.
Thank you, Dr. Crosby, and thank you, Mote Marine and the scientists, for everything you guys do. I've lived in Sarasota my entire life. I'm a fourth generation. I've never experienced red tide as bad as it is right now. It's had a devastating impact on many people who rely on our tourism economy, who live on the water, and I think that we're so fortunate to have you guys in our community, and we're so fortunate to have a governor like Rick Scott who really stepped up to the plate to provide this new money for this research so that moving forward in the future, that hopefully some of these blooms and some of these, the red tide impact is mitigated so it could be a lot less damaging to our overall economy and the quality of life and everything else. And it is amazing that we have some of the best and brightest people on this issue here in Sarasota. And what's amazing with this research, and I'm calling right now for the Florida legislature to move forward in a bipartisan nature to make sure that we have recurring funding for all the research they need to make sure that they can get their job done, and that we could have a long-lasting impact. And it starts right here in Sarasota County, and hopefully around the world they'll be able to benefit from the research that we do. So thank you, Dr. Crosby.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. Yeah, and the Executive Director of FWC, Eric Sutton, just made an announcement, and I just want you all to pause for a second and think about what he just announced, okay? For the very first time, the state of Florida is launching an initiative to not just monitor and do research on red tide. We are launching a major new initiative, a $2.2 million initiative to really focus on applied science and technology development to really develop those methods, those technologies that we can deploy to actually fight against red tide. Now, we need to keep moving forward with the research, no question about that. We need to learn more about the forcing functions that cause these red tide events. And they are extremely diverse from many different avenues and sources. I liken when I say that we need to be increasing our ability to forecast red tide so that we can do a better job of attacking it, I say we should be getting to that point in time that we're able to forecast red tide events the same way we're able to forecast hurricanes. And then I will only slightly jokingly say that the development of models for forecasting hurricanes are somewhat elementary to what it is going to take to forecast red tide, because hurricanes are primarily physical in terms of their modeling. When you're talking about modeling red tide events, you're laying physical oceanography, physical weather events over chemical nutrient modeling, over biological monitoring and modeling for competing organisms and grazing organisms. So you've got a multifaceted layer of modeling that is going to have to be developed. We can do this. We can do this. And this is part of the vision that Representative Gruters mentioned in terms of calling for the legislature to fund a new initiative that goes even beyond what you just heard announced, that we're going to be able to do a much better job in forecasting red tide. And with this new announcement today, we're going to begin that really significant, not just testing in the laboratory, but actually testing in the field. We are hoping within, I'm hoping 6 months, we'll be able to deploy some new field testing of mitigation strategies. Dr. Pierce and his great team of scientists here, as well as our partnering scientists, have already deployed in field testing a very innovative ozonation technology that holds great promise. We're looking now to bring back a new and improved clay mitigation technology that we're going to test very carefully. One of the things we have to be very, very careful about, folks, is that we do no harm with the mitigation strategies. You don't want to make matters worse, so we really have to be methodical in testing these new technologies in the laboratory, in mesocosms, and then in controlled pilot field testing, which we will do, just like we did with the ozonation technology. So I think the announcement today is an announcement of great hope, built on decades of wonderfully productive science partnerships here in the state of Florida. And I'm very excited about the future of science and technology to help us fight this red tide event in the future. And I don't know, Secretary Valentine, would you like to make some comments as well?
Thank you, Dr. Crosby. So I would say, again, from the Department of Environmental Protection, time and time again, we see great things come from partnerships. And I think that's because partnerships naturally bring passion for the environment and a sense of urgency, and you heard that from Dr. Crosby and the others today. And so what we've seen from that, this year my agency has one of its largest budgets ever, $1.8 billion, to work on long-term strategies to stop releases from Lake Okeechobee. And we see tremendous projects moving forward with the governor's leadership, getting full funding for restoring Herbert Hoover Dike, moving forward with the EAA Agricultural Storage Reservoir, moving forward with Everglades Restoration. But these partnerships also bring a sense of urgency, knowing that each day our 3,000 staff ask ourselves, what more can we do today, right? We have to ask ourselves today, what can we do also as we're working on long-term solutions? How do we wake up each and every day to say, what are we going to do to partner with our communities? And so we've seen our agency, under the governor's leadership and his executive orders, now issued $13 million for that partnership of addressing, minimizing, and mitigating harmful algal blooms in the community, either cleaning up blue-green algae or partnering with other agencies and Mote to provide cleanup and minimization and mitigation efforts for red tide. And so we're excited to continue that partnership and excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're about done. So I think you've heard enough of just talking heads, and maybe it's an opportunity if anyone might have a question or two for the executive director or for the secretary as well.
And if you could state your name and who your question is directed for, that would help us a lot.
John Rogers, News Channel 8. I'm not sure exactly who would be the best to answer this question. So you mentioned that the field testing may start in 6 months. Can you describe more about what this testing is like and how long this procedure lasts?
Well, I'll take a whack at it, and then I'll let the executive director talk a little bit about it. If we use the ozonation technology in the pilot field testing that we did there, I think everyone needs to understand that there's years and years and years of research already that has been done with each of these potential new mitigation strategies. So we're not starting at ground zero. But now that we're getting ready to talk about deploying in pilot scale projects in the field, with the ozonator, it was a dead-end canal in Boca Grande, and it took many, many months of preparation of the engineering, the technology, to be able to actually deploy this in the field. We obviously work with the local communities as well. It takes an enormous team of scientists. I mean, I've got maybe a half dozen or so of our Mote scientists here, and maybe a half dozen of the state scientists here, but we had a team of well over 30 that were involved in just that one field test, and that was the actual testing from the time you flip the switch on until you turn it off was what, about 4 days? 5 days. But the prep work going into that can be months and months. And it's very, very important that we're very thorough as we're going through our laboratory testing and then our mesocosm studies, which are basically small replicas of what might be found in a field environment, that we want to make sure that the strategy, the technology is as targeted as can be. You know, it's a little bit like, it's very easy actually to kill red tide. It's extremely easy to kill red tide. Let's get a bunch of Clorox and dump it in the ocean, right? No, you can't do that because it'll kill other things. So we really got to make sure that these technologies are targeted for the organism and the toxin. Remember, red tide produces a toxin, and when you kill them and they break up, the toxin comes out as well. So it's not just the organism itself, but it's also the toxin. So there'll be a heck of a lot of work, but I hope, I'm pushing that our scientists and our partners will be ready to at least start doing some field pilot projects in about 6 months' time from when we begin. But Executive Director.
Thank you, Dr. Crosby. And Dr. Crosby was speaking largely on the kind of the timeline to really on some of the technologies. We are currently looking at getting in the laboratory testing of the clay a matter of days, and then the microcosm and in-field smaller experiments we hope to begin in 6 weeks or less. That would be a very optimistic schedule. And then, of course, as Dr. Crosby said, to scale those up, we're looking probably more in the 6-month horizon.
Just a follow-up, and maybe this is too grand. If these tests are very promising, how soon could we see these efforts used in, when the next threat comes?
Well, that's a fair question, and to be fair back, we're going to have to wait and let the science dictate that. But our scientists will be looking at the results and analyzing to make sure that we do no harm. So that's really can't answer that. We'll just have to wait and see what the results are.
Go ahead.
Steve Reed, Longbow Key News and Sarasota City News. Thanks everybody for assembling. It feels a little like a war room here today. I got a question. I want to put aside for a second the applied science, which I understand there must be some significant money that has to have clear proposals and a focus of the research. But I have a question on the pure science sense. Has Mote established any kind of causal relationship between environmental instigators and the red tide? Between pollution, between farming, between any of the things that we see that we could be doing as a preventive sense? I understand that obviously you can treat cancer with radiation, but there's also preventative medicine. Is there any significant steps? First, has there been that relationship established? And secondly, are there any significant recommendations or things that Governor Scott is willing to, if so, would enact or help to not exacerbate the situation while we work on deploying these to-come mechanisms to destroy the red tide? Is there what I would call a more holistic approach in the works?
Well, I'll start, and then I'll turn it over to Secretary Valentine. But one of the reasons it looks like a war room, as you described in here, is because we're facing a unique red tide event. There have been longer events. There have been longer inshore events that we know documented in the 40s. But the red tide it starts well offshore through upwelling, and I'll let the scientists explain that. But it starts way offshore, and this unique event is because wind and current have brought it into the inshore environment, in an estuary environment. And estuaries, by their nature, are rich. This is why you have the fisheries we do. We have wonderful estuaries, the mangrove coast. It is the nursery for all of the marine organisms. So with the wind and current keeping it here, that's just created a unique event. And then, so Secretary Valentine, if you wanted to kind of address that any further.
Sure, I'll mention, I mean, in addition to the announcement FWCC made today about the $2.2 million, I know in that same announcement, the FWCC is looking at establishing, under the governor's request, a task force for red tide and also additional research center for red tide, going at sort of the longer term and holistic approach you were mentioning. Well, certainly also for environmental factors. As a state, whether red tide is here or not, we're passionate about our water quality, and we demand improvements throughout Florida for our water quality. And so that's what you've seen just over the last few years. I think the biggest transition which has helped us approach that is dedicated funding for our large water quality efforts. And while that may seem like a nuanced approach, what it has meant is a whole groundswell, a whole shift for the way my agency works, is that we now can come to our communities, and what we have is community-based water quality plans to reach a target level together and partner with our community. But now we are coming and saying, we have dedicated funding to partner with you to achieve the sustainability for your community that you demand, right?
There's a causal relationship been established by Mote between any of the environmental instigators and red tide? That's the question.
As much as we all would like to be able to point our finger at one particular thing, or even two or three particular things, red tide is just not that simple. It obviously is something that we know, the science has demonstrated, that it does begin, as the previous two gentlemen have mentioned, 10 to 40 miles offshore, upwelling events, confluence of currents, winds, tides bring it in close. Coastal waters are naturally very nutrient rich. Whether there were human beings living here or not, coastal waters will be naturally nutrient rich. However, with the advent and the growth of human populations, we are look around, look in a mirror. Each and every one of us, every day in our life, is contributing to nutrients flowing from the terrestrial environment into the coastal environment. So, yes, all of the outflows, in fact, there are correlations, statistical correlations, of total outflow of riverine input that is correlated with duration and intensity, but not one single river or one single source. There is no smoking gun, okay? It's all together. And we are working, in fact, we were just discussing with many of the local county folks the significant increase in desire to improve stormwater controls. We've had some excellent conversations with some very innovative farmers in the agriculture industry about sustainable farming and being able to better control nutrient outflows from agriculture lands. Each and every one of us can do something in our own yards by decreasing the amount of nutrients that we put into our own yards, planting more Florida native kinds of vegetation that doesn't require as much nutrients. So each and every one of us does have a role to play in this. And I'm convinced that if we all work together on this, I think we've got a great strategy. It's going to be a combination of everything from the local level, improvements in stormwater and septic, all the way up to developing new technologies. I'm sorry to also say red tide is here to stay. It's a naturally occurring event. What we need to use is science and technology to get a better control on the impacts, the durations, and the intensities of red tides. And I'm convinced we can do that.
Doctor,
yes, sir.
How do you respond to people in the community? We've certainly spoken to them. You've heard from them. How do you respond to people in the community who say mistakes have been made over the years by elected leaders on many different sides of this, and that press conferences like these and announcements of grants a few months before an election are attempts to save face politically?
Well, I'm just a scientist. I'm not a politician. So, and Mote is officially agnostic when it comes to politics. We really got to keep the science very, very objective here. I don't.
You're aware of what?
Yeah.
And you can't divorce. You
No,
can't divorce
no.
them one from the other.
Well, let me start off by saying I'll probably get myself in trouble with this, but again, not taking sides here in the election, okay, but pointing a finger at an individual in an elected position and in a high elected official position, and saying that person is the cause of what we are experiencing now is not only naive, but it's counterproductive. This is the time we really do need to work together on this. And last time I checked, Rick Scott wasn't governor in the 1500s when the Spanish documented massive red tide events and fish kills along this coast. Rick Scott wasn't governor when in the 1800s when we had a major red tide event. Rick Scott wasn't the governor when we had the longest duration red tide. So let's not blame individuals. I, for one, applaud, no matter what the timing in the political season, a renewed focus and a strategic focus on providing the resources that we as a science community need to have to be able to address this problem. So I applaud that, and I would applaud that no matter who it was.
Is it fair to evaluate
Last
the
question.
impact? Is it fair to evaluate the impact of budget cuts? Though, I mean, in the last 10 years or 8 years or 6 years or however long, I mean, the fact of the matter is, if decisions made by elected officials do impact things, whether science starts in 1500 or 5000 BC.
I'm just a scientist. So maybe I'll let my colleagues behind me answer that question.
Secretary, certainly that would be appropriate.
Absolutely. And as far as the timing goes, I mean, again, as passionate as our communities are about new issues facing them, as a red tide that morphs in different manners than prior red tides, or in prior red tides in recent memory, our staff are just as passionate and demand the same thing, that every day we ask ourselves, what more can we do? And so to me, the timing has to do with there's a need our communities are facing, and our staff every day will ask and demand that we step up and do the same. What more can we provide the communities? And so to me, that's what the timing is. When we have a community that's facing an environmental challenge and is looking for support, our urgency will be there just as much with the community, with us looking to say, what can we bring to partner with our community to overcome that challenge? And we're pleased to do that. And again, my budget as an agency for the Department of Environmental Protection is the highest it's ever been. And we're excited to partner and be passionate about our resources and do as much as we can. Thank you.
We want to thank you all for coming out. I have a copy of Governor Scott's press release that I'd love to make sure each of you have before you leave today. Again, thank you for continuing to cover this important topic and for being here today. Thank you all.